Welcome back. We're gonna watch this Parasite video on why Parasite should terrify us slash the US by Brory Deschanel. Alright? This movie, if you haven't seen it, this is gonna have heavy spoilers. It's a Korean movie, and it depicts a family of like opportunists slash con artists, and how they kind of go through life. They're a poor family from like a poor neighborhood, and they see an opportunity to make a bunch of money and increase their level of wealth, and increase their like standard of living. And they jump an opportunity, and it goes kind of haywire, and it's like I would say like a like a representation between the class war, the invisible class war that's happening between like poor and rich people. And this is like this lady's interpretation of the situation.
뭐야? 소독해?
요즘도 저런 걸 하네. 그러게요.
그래요?
나도 봐. 공짜로 집안에 소독도 하고 곱등도 없애고.
그래. 요새 곱등이 너무 많아.
It's like they're like, that's the shit I'm talking about. They're like opportunists, so they see that they're killing stink bugs and they can't afford extermination in their home, so they're gonna let it run through them, which is fucking genius. But at the same time, they're not smart enough or care about their own body and safety to at least like put on a mask, you know. And instead, they're kind of just like going with the flow and letting the hurt them.
내가 가자 그랬지.
닫을까요?
Bong Joon-ho's tour de force black comedy thriller Parasite is a careful examination of growing class tensions in modern society. Through this film, Bong demonstrates his mastery of oral and visual storytelling. The sleek transitions, irony-laced dialogue, and morally ambiguous characters come together to deliver one of the most riveting movies of the decade.
This movie's fucking astounding. Like that's
The
piss
film
right
centers
there.
on an abjectly poor family who rely on cunning and manipulation to survive in their harsh society. The narrative begins when the son, Ki-woo, is presented with an opportunity to tutor the daughter of the rich Park family. Due to the trusting and gullible dispositions of the Parks, Ki-woo and his family are able to effectively deceive their way into obtaining service jobs in the household.
그런 여자를 도려내려면 우리도 뭔가 준비를 해야겠다.
However, it's not until long that the family discovers they are not the only ones mooching off of the Parks. In a long and suspenseful scene reminiscent of Hitchcock, it's revealed that the Park's former housekeeper has been harboring her husband in an unknown bunker beneath the house to escape the violence and coercion of his debt collectors.
So that's like a pretty huge spoiler and like a massive leap into the story. Because like she said, that doesn't really happen until, towards the end. That's like the climax of the whole movie. If you like watch the movie, you can see that they were like living good at this point of the movie. If they kind of just did what they were doing prior and working, because like they actually had jobs, they were doing everything, they were getting paid a lot more money than they were used to, and they were enjoying a life that they've never known before. And instead of like being happy and content that their life has gotten better, they kind of get greedier and they start getting jealous of the life that these people are living, and they start thinking like, well, if they're living this and we did all of this and like convinced them blah blah blah, then we could have this if we tried hard enough. We could have this, and it just gets to the point where like why do people need more? Like once like at first you're like, okay, yeah, you have like you don't have enough shit and life's pretty bad. But once you do have enough, prospectively, to how you were living before, like in comparison to how you were living before, then why does the next tier entice you so much? Is it because you were just in that grind mindset where you remember how poor you were, but at the same time, like why doesn't that help you get appreciation to what you've gotten when you lived so low before? And that's something that he doesn't really tackle, the director. He doesn't really tackle, since it's more of like, we act this way because this is how we were raised, rather than like a self-reflection type thing for the characters, but definitely a self-reflection for society as a whole if you look at it that way.
This scene marks a significant shift in tone and brings to fruition the meaning behind the film's title. After a long and miserable night in which the poor family essentially kills the former housekeeper in front of her helpless husband, and run home only to discover their semi-basement has flooded with sewage water, we see how these jobs that the family once enjoyed are now becoming grating and tiresome. This is slipped in through subtle moments and interactions.
나스는 나스이지. 어, 한국 불러주면 완전 땡큐고.
자기도 있잖아.
Pride.
마지막 애가 아직 자요. 다해. 나 잘 어울려?
뭐가?
잘 어울리냐고. 여기.
We can glean from these scenes that there is a new clarity with which the family now views themselves. At first glance, the title Parasite represents the way these members of the lower classes leech off of the good nature and generosity of the Park family.
Then it's like
But what Bong
switches.
is trying to tell us in the aforementioned moments is that the Parks are also leeching off of the lower classes by living comfortably off the backs of their labor. It's here that the film presents
Which is like, I think a lot of people like in the American middle class, which as I've stated before, is not a thing. They see poor people that are on welfare, that they're slightly above, as parasites, because they need help and we don't need help, but we're also not millionaires, so they think they're middle class. And when you equalize it and you take account the benefits that quote unquote poor people are getting and the amount of money that middle class people are getting and how much taxes are being taken out of their money, there may be 10,000 difference, right? And that 10,000 is supposed to be a lot. It's not. And they see that they're leeching and the rich people are providing value because they're giving jobs to people. But rich people are only rich because they have people working for them and doing all the hard work and labor. Because, like I said before, the only way to build wealth is to take other people's time. You only have so much time in the world. You only have so much time to produce productivity to make monetary value in this capitalistic system, or in this world system of how productivity is value, value is money. And the only way to achieve productivity is to achieve efficiency and time management. And the only way to achieve time management and time efficiency is to take other people's time. Because once you boil it down to, oh, I need to figure out how to be more efficient with my time, you start to realize that, oh, I can't. There's no getting out of the amount of time, the limit that we've set out of it, besides taking someone else's time. So in that sense, billionaires are parasites, and so on and so forth. But we're more of like a synergistic parasite. Like we're paradoxical. Like it could go either way on who is benefiting more, who is not benefiting as much. like, you know, there's viewpoints that you need to take into account, and it's a more nuanced discussion than what I'm saying, but I'm also, you know, talking to myself, so it can only get so nuanced.
Presents us with a frightening but important question. In late capitalist society, who are the parasites? The difficulty of answering this question can be explained with two concepts borrowed from the School of Cultural Studies: cool capitalism and cultural hegemony. In The Coolness of Capitalism, Jim McGuigan states, "Neoliberal capitalism has constructed popular legitimacy of such a resilient kind that it goes beyond management ideology and propaganda into the texture and common sense of everyday life." To support this idea, he uses the example of Apple, who through their sleek and shiny products have become so embedded in Western culture that we have become blind to the company's very real exploitation of their outsourced workers.
Yes, sir.
Foxconn is not a sweatshop. I mean, you go to this place and it's a factory, but my gosh, I mean, they've got restaurants and movie theaters and hospitals and swimming pools, and I mean, for a factory, it's a pretty nice factory.
It's like it's high posh slavery. It's like, oh, they got cafeterias, they got medical help, they got, you know, beds to live in. All they got to do is live there, spend their money there, and we give them money to spend money here. You know, it's an ecosystem. It's not slavery, right?
This disaffection amongst consumers to the acute poverty and exploitation of others is what McGuigan calls cool capitalism. To understand how cool capitalism plays out in Parasite, let's look at this scene from the second act.
여보, 당신이 짜파구리 먹을래?
왜 가슴이 안 먹는데?
어.
아, 나 피곤하게 올랐어.
뭘 그렇게 마음 민망하게. 박 사장님, 오늘도 절 먹여주시고 재워주시고. Respect!
Here, the former housekeeper's husband, who has been hiding in the bunker for
That
4
part's so
years,
fucking funny.
maintains his
Respect.
sanity through a daily routine of hitting the light switches to illuminate Mr. Park's path as he walks up the stairs at night. Mr. Park, unaware of the bunker beneath his house, is led to believe that these motion-censored lights are a marvel of modern technology. This scene distills McGuigan's idea that Mr. Park is blind to the fact that these luxuries he enjoys in his everyday life are afforded to him through the hard labor of someone beneath him. It's no coincidence that the housekeeper's husband lives physically beneath the Parks. This obliviousness towards the suffering and labor of others at times borders on indifference, which is exhibited most clearly in the Park's relationships with the poor family. For example, as Gitek drives Mrs. Park home from grocery shopping, she exclaims to a friend on the phone that the storm from the night before was a blessing in disguise, completely ignorant to the fact that thousands of people in the city were displaced as a result, including Gitek. Another example of this ignorance is how the Park clan displays their physical aversion to the smell of the poor family. This theme becomes increasingly prevalent throughout the film, as their reactions to smell become more exaggerated. In Purity and Danger, Mary Douglas suggests that cleanliness and hygiene are social constructs. She states, "There is no such thing as absolute dirt. It exists only in the eyes of the beholder." In Parasite, we see how the Park's revulsion to the smell of people like Gitek is actually a revulsion to people they perceive as lesser than themselves. Their palpable desire to escape these smells, like when Mr. Park plugs his nose as he flees from the mayhem of his garden party, signals to the viewer that those who benefit from capitalism distance themselves from the have-nots, both metaphorically and physically.
It's crazy, like, that like that detail in the movie is such a like a capitalistic thing, right? Like this is all gonna sound crazy for Western audience, but like shampoos created by company. People were making, you know, soaps to wash away dirt, fine. Wash away, you know, some oils, fine. But then you now have gotten to a point where it's more profitable to create your own kind of like boogeyman, right? So you have shampoo which just strips your hair of nutrients, and you have to bring in another product that people have to use, so it puts back the nutrients. So you have conditioner, and then conditioner sometimes makes it too oily, or you maybe use too much conditioner, so you got to use something else, or maybe you have a different type of oils in your hair, quote unquote, and you need to use a different type of shampoo, and you create these things rather than like a natural process. Because most of the time, if you just wash off every day, you use soap to clean extremities that might need to be cleaned, and oh my god, the guy's kicking my ass. And you use water to wash your hair, and take some of the oils out, get some of the dirt. You don't really need that much things in your hair. Like there's a lot of advertisement for people to do things to the hair, and to do things to their teeth, to just do things in general, right? If you're being advertised, being convinced to buy a product, everyone thinks it's like, oh, it's because like they're competing and they want us to buy a product. Like, no, they have to convince you to use these. And of course, in a Western society, we're just not gonna just randomly stop using everything. You need to find your own moderation, whether that's um natural products only from natural things, like how they used to do it back in the day, or maybe you use a smaller amount, or you abstain from using certain products that have, that you research and saw that it has certain adverse reactions to your type of skin, blah blah blah. Like it has to be tailored to you. Like that's why you have to do your own research and figure out what works best for you. But in a broader and more general sense, there are a lot of things in the world that are just created so they can sell. So they can like sell you something. Like your body probably doesn't need it. Your hair probably doesn't need it. Your mouth probably doesn't need it. Or, at least not as much as what they're advertising. So definitely something to look up.
In an interview with GQ, Bong said, "What the parks really want, and this is something Mr. Park says in the film, is they draw a line over their sophisticated world and they don't let anyone cross it. They're not interested in the outside world, the subway, and people who might perhaps smell. They want to push everyone outside of that line, and they want to remain safe behind it." Much like how consumers of Apple do not need to think about the exploitation of Foxconn because its workers live on the other side of the world, the parks do not have to worry themselves about the poor because they are physically isolated from the nearby slums. The smell of poverty is an ugly reminder to the parks that suffering is actually nearby.
I love poverty,
While the parks
bro.
present as well-intentioned
Crazy.
and kind-hearted people, they choose to be ignorant to the extreme poverty that surrounds them because they are comfortable with the lifestyles afforded to them at the expense of the impoverished. They recoil from the smell for fear of being confronted with the reality outside of their privileged bubble.
Like disgusting, smelly people.
Late capitalism and the ever-increasing division between rich and poor is able to persist in our contemporary world through what Antonio Gramsci calls cultural hegemony. For Gramsci, cultural hegemony is achieved through inducing the consent of the majority of subaltern or subordinate groups to a given socio-political constellation. Throughout the film, Mr. Park speaks often about a line he draws between himself and his employees. This line of course connotes a level of professionalism that Mr. Park expects of his employees, but what it also represents is a division he has established to maintain his status as a superior. Mr. Park expresses his satisfaction with the former housekeeper because she never oversteps her boundaries, but Kitek, on the other hand, is always teetering on the edge of this line. In this sense, the former housekeeper consents to her status as a subordinate, whereas Kitek, who eventually revolts against his subjugation by killing Mr. Park, becomes increasingly conscious of his class and the hegemonic social order that keeps him there.
So that's the what I was asking about before, like why don't people find perspective? And there's my answer. And I kind of understand of like you don't want to just conform. Like once you realize like, oh, they're definitely getting the better end of the deal. You don't want to just conform just because you had like a um shittier like beginning. But at the same time, of course, like not everyone's just gonna just start murdering people, right? Like that's a pretty extreme thing. But at the same time, you it's kind of like you have to find a better way to one up, right? Like you, I guess you, if you didn't want to also be that involved in cultural homogeny homogeny and really take part in capitalism and become the person employing or become the person exploiting other people's time and excuse me, uh, just trying to enrich yourself, then at that point you really need to figure out like what could make the situation better for you. And if that thing that makes it better is that it makes that you need to be richer than the person that you're envious of, or that made you realize your lack, like whatever you're lacking that made you realize that, then maybe that's the avenue you gotta go. Or maybe you figure out that life is not really all about having things, and if you're content with life, then you shouldn't compare yourself with others regardless. But um then maybe you need to find a more spiritual kind of like outlet to to um to bridge that gap that you're feeling, to fill that lack, to fill whatever it is that you think you're feeling. Like you would need to do a little bit of introspection and figure out what you need to do to help yourself rather than conforming to a more materialistic valuation of life when if you're in this situation. Oops.
The poor characters have deep feelings of admiration and reverence towards the Park family. For example, in the same scene, each member of the poor family, in spite of themselves, goes around discussing what they like about the parks. This admiration runs even deeper with the housekeeper's husband, whose masochistic headbanging is his version of paying respect to the man who he believes has saved him.
Respect.
Cultural hegemony, which favors the ideology of the ruling classes, teaches anyone who falls outside the dominant worldview that the dominant culture is something to aspire to. This can take place in many forms.
My skin's so white. Come Olive Naturals White Plus Papaya. Feel your skin and soul sing.
The prevailing standard of Eurocentric beauty has compelled women around the world to alter their appearances in an effort to achieve this conception of normality. Democracy has become such a dominant standard for a fair and just society that countries are now ranked on an index based on how democratic they are. And the list goes on. With
That's the freedom list.
case of late capitalism, the ruling class is the wealthy, and in Parasite, Ki-woo and his family alter their appearances and overall dispositions to fit into the mold of higher status individuals. Their reverence for the people they are using reflects an innate yearning to become them both economically and socially. Bong tricks the viewer into thinking there will be a happy ending as we watch Gi-taek, who has been hiding in the bunker after killing Mr. Park, reunite with his family who have now made enough money to buy the Park's house. However, this momentary happiness is dissolved as it's revealed that the scene is only an aspiration written by Ki-woo in a letter to his father. In an interview, Bong revealed that it would take 564 years for Ki-woo to save enough money to buy the house.
Oh my
This
god.
directly contradicts the mantra of contemporary capitalism, which has attempted to convince people that with a little hard work and determination, anyone can achieve higher economic status. The reality is that through cultural hegemony, the rich are able to stay rich by manufacturing the consent of the masses while creating the illusion of social mobility. Ironically, the poor daughter, Ki-jung, is regarded as the only
Fucking
member
died.
of the family who fits into the wealthy environment.
너 아까 내가 위에 올라가서 너 아까 욕조에서 목욕할 때
목욕 뭐.
뭐랄까 어울린다 그래야 되나? 이 부잣집 분위기랑 잘 맞아. 우리랑은 달라.
조카.
아 진짜
My God.
얘가 아까 그 욕조에 앉아가지고 테레비를 딱 보는데
but she is also the only member of the family to be killed. When all is said and done, the rich family is able to escape the horror of their situation, while the poor family is trapped in it. Neoliberal capitalism takes economic responsibility away from the government and places it into the hands of free market institutions and private individuals. In this type of society, your value as a person is weighed upon your ability to sell your labor for a wage. What it boils down to is a massive disparity in wealth that regards the wealthy as winners and the poor as losers in the free market game. This is where we see things like hostile architecture that prioritizes the needs and aesthetics.
Dude, hostile architecture is like the most dystopian shit I've ever seen in my life. I did a video on it a really long time ago, and the fact that people like sign off on that blows my mind. It's just craziness. Fuck.
Aesthetics of corporate enterprises over the needs of the hungry and homeless. These defensive strategies become mechanisms for hiding the indigent out of sight for fear of disrupting the wealthy social order. The great fallacy of this system is that every individual starts off with equal access to opportunity and can therefore compete on an equal playing field, which is simply not the truth. And when we look at the poor characters in Parasite fighting amongst themselves, vying to maintain their subordinate positions, we see that there is no attempt or even ability to overthrow the prevailing system of domination, but rather it's a competition between the poor of who can be the least destitute.
This was what I was talking about before. Also, this is a good representation of lower class people that are on social welfare and all that stuff, and people that think they're middle class. Like, you're just vying to be the least poor, but you're never going to be rich. So instead of helping each other, you want to be underneath the rich people. It's fucking insane. Just be poor. Figure out how to be rich.
In a capitalist society, the prevailing conservative argument is that social democracy, higher taxes, and budget deficits only serve to extract from the hard-earned pockets of the rich and put this money into the hands of the lazy and deceitful poor. But what Parasite astutely points out is that the relationship between the rich and poor is largely parasitic in the opposite direction. The poor are often poor because capitalistic enterprises are unwilling to compensate fairly for their labor in order to maximize a profit. While the jobs occupied by Kiwoo's family offer them proximity to wealth, at the end of the day their wages do not provide them enough means to escape destitution. Rather, the degrading and emotional labor they provide for the parks only truly benefits the parks. At the end of the film, with Ki-Tek left to an uncertain fate in the bunker and Ki-Woo relegated to his basement, we're left with the bleak reality that the current capitalistic order is unyielding and unforgiving. What's more, this cruel system can be easily normalized. After all, the greatest trick late capitalism ever pulled was to convince the world it doesn't exist. This is the harsh reality of the world we now live in, and this is why Parasite should terrify us all.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was pretty scattered in that one. Still trying to figure out how to like play a game and comment on the video. But I think my main point would have to be that capitalism is made for people that can create, right? Like, it's made for people that can siphon other people's time. They have an idea, they have to expand on it, and to expand on it, they need manpower. To get manpower, they need to convince people to work for them for a limited amount so they can make a large profit, and then those profits can entice other people to spend money on them so they can employ more people, pay them a limited amount so they can maximize profits, and so on and so forth, and keep going until you're a $1 trillion company, which is, I don't know if you've ever thought about what a $1 trillion company is. That's fucking insane. Like, there's, as of right now, I don't think there's that much enough value for a company to be worth $1 trillion. But yeah, that's and our system is so, not even our system, but like our media is so like apparently hostile towards the lower half of the spectrum, this like class spectrum, and anyone that's not in the lower class feels good about themselves, even though they're not in the higher class who is ruling them, just because there's someone lower than them. And then lower people are just made to build up frustration and anger. And this is the current economic system that's been in place for hundreds of years. And it always goes out to that lower that lower like class of people eventually gets too much things shouldered on them, too much stress, too much anger, too much, not enough food, and they start revolting. There's always a revolt. And there's a great video out there. It's about an hour and a half long, 2 hours long, that tells you the economic stages of every single country that has ruled in power. And America is currently past its peak, and then it's going to its throw and getting to that lower valley where it's being surpassed by another country that is trying to reach its peak. And the sign of passing the peak has always been changing your money and taking it out of a store value like gold. Once it's taken out of gold and becomes a fiat currency, an imaginary currency, everything is imaginary, but once it's reached that point, that's when it really starts spiraling, and more economic strife happens, more civil stripes happens, just more unrest happens, to where a revolution happens. And then once that revolution happens, the country kind of becomes what it becomes, and the other superpower maintains that status quo until they're also toppled. So until someone makes a better economic system, it's kind of just going to keep following that trend, and we can keep saying like, I can't believe this happened. But data has shown that unless we change something, this is the outcome of the United States. Whether it's 10 years from now, 100 years from now, it will happen. So see you guys later.